Introduction: A Doctor's Midnight Call. Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. I am your drowsy guide, Professor Somnus, and tonight we drift backward through time to a quiet autumn evening in the year 1918. Picture, if you will, a world grown weary from war, where the guns have finally fallen silent across distant battlefields, but where a new kind of shadow has begun to creep across the land. Tonight, we step into the flickering amber glow of a hospital tent, where oil lamps cast dancing shadows on canvas walls, and the air carries the faint scent of carbolic acid and worn leather. Here, in this gentle pool of lamplight, sits a figure bent over a simple wooden desk. His shoulders are tired, his hands steady despite their weariness, and before him lies an open journal, its pages yellowed by candlelight and filled with careful, flowing script. This is our plague doctor, though not the mysterious figure in a beaked mask that you might imagine, but rather a quiet, compassionate physician whose gentle hands have soothed countless fevered brows. Each night, when his rounds are complete, when the last patient has been tucked beneath clean blankets, he returns to this small desk. He dips his pen in ink that gleams like midnight, and he writes, not medical notes or clinical observations, but something far more personal. A diary where he pours out his hopes and fears, his small victories and quiet sorrows, transforming the weight of each day into words that flow like water across the page. The tent around him breathes softly with the autumn wind. Canvas walls rustle like whispered prayers. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimes the midnight hour, its bronze voice carrying across sleeping villages and empty fields. The doctor pauses in his writing, listening to that distant bell, then returns his attention to the page before him. Tonight, we will walk beside this gentle soul through the pages of his diary. We will witness his quiet courage as he tends to the sick. This is not a tale of horror, but of hope, a soothing bedtime story of one man's dedication to healing, told in the softest whispers of history. So settle back now, dear listeners. Let your breathing slow and your thoughts grow quiet. The doctor is about to begin his nightly rounds, and we shall follow him through the peaceful corridors of memory, where even the darkest moments are illuminated by the warm glow of human compassion. The autumn night is deep and still. The lamp burns steady and true, and our story begins with the gentle scratch of pen on paper as history unfolds in the most tranquil of voices. Part 1. After the Guns. World War I's end and a new foe let us drift now to the closing days of October 1918, when the world holds its breath in the space between one darkness and another. The Great War, that terrible machine of destruction that has devoured for long years, finally begins to sputter and slow. Across the muddy fields of France and Belgium, the guns that once roared day and night have grown quiet, their voices fading to occasional whispers in the distance. Picture a battlefield at dawn, shrouded in gentle fog that rolls across the scarred earth like a soft gray blanket. The trenches that once teemed with frightened young men now lie empty, their wooden boards slick with morning dew. Barbed wire catches droplets of moisture that glisten like tiny diamonds in the pale light. The air smells of wet earth and autumn leaves, and somewhere far off, a lark begins its tentative morning song. Our doctor stands at the edge of this somber landscape, his medical bag heavy in his hand, his coat collar turned up against the cool morning air. He has served here for months, tending to the wounded, bringing comfort to the dying. And now he watches the sun struggle to break through the mist. The silence feels almost sacred after so much noise, so much chaos, so much screaming. But even in this blessed quiet, something troubles him. As he turns away from the empty battlefield and begins the long walk back to the field hospital, he notices how many of his fellow medical staff have taken ill. A persistent cough echoes from the nurses' quarters. The orderlies move more slowly than usual, their faces pale and drawn. Yesterday, 3 more doctors reported fever and chills that no amount of rest seemed to cure. The doctor adjusts his grip on his bag and quickens his pace. Back home, the letters from his colleagues speak of strange new cases, patients arriving not with bullet wounds or shrapnel, but with symptoms that puzzle even the most experienced physicians. High fever that strikes like lightning, a cough that tears at the throat, lungs that fill with fluid as if drowning from within. He reaches the medical tent as the first rays of sunlight pierce the fog. The canvas structure stands quietly in the growing light, its guy ropes taut against the morning breeze. Inside, oil lamps burn low, casting warm circles of amber light across wooden crates that serve as desks and chairs. The scent of kerosene mingles with the sharper smell of disinfectant, creating an oddly comforting atmosphere of safety and order. The doctor sets down his bag and moves to his small writing table, where a bundle of letters waits for his attention. These are not official dispatches or medical reports, but personal correspondence from physicians back home, old colleagues from medical school, country doctors from small towns, urban specialists from great city hospitals. Each letter carries the same troubling message. Something new is spreading, something they have never seen before. He lights a fresh lamp, adjusting the wick until the flame burns steady and bright. The warm glow illuminates his tired face as he unfolds the first letter, dated just a week ago. The handwriting is familiar. Dr. Margaret Willis from the Children's Hospital in Boston. Her usual cheerful tone has given way to something more urgent, more concerned. My dear friend, the letter begins, and the doctor can almost hear her voice in the carefully formed words. We are seeing cases here that defy our understanding. Families struck down within days of each other, children who were playing in the morning found feverish and delirious by evening. The hospitals are filling faster than we can manage, and still they come. The doctor folds the letter carefully and reaches for the next one. This from Dr. Heinrich Müller in Berlin, written in precise German script. Then another from Dr. Jean-Baptiste Rousseau in Paris, his elegant French flowing across the page like poetry, even as it describes scenes of growing medical crisis. Each letter tells the same story, an illness that spreads like wildfire through crowded neighborhoods. Patients who seem to recover only to relapse with frightening speed. Medical staff falling ill at alarming rates. Morgues that cannot handle the sudden influx of the dead. As the doctor reads, the morning light grows stronger outside the tent. He can hear the distant sounds of the camp awakening. Boots on wooden walkways. The clank of metal pots as breakfast is prepared. The low murmur of voices as men begin another day. But inside this small circle of lamplight, surrounded by letters that speak of a new kind of war, he feels a familiar weight settling on his shoulders. He sets the letters aside and reaches for his leather-bound diary, its cover worn smooth by countless nights of writing. The pages fall open to his most recent entry, written just yesterday evening. His own handwriting looks back at him, neat and careful, despite his exhaustion. October 28th, the The guns are quiet tonight, but I find no peace in the silence. Word comes from home of a sickness that spreads faster than any flame. I fear we have survived one plague only to face another, and this time we have no trenches to hide in, no generals to lead us, no maps to show us where the enemy advances. The doctor closes the diary and leans back in his chair, listening to the gentle sounds of the morning. Outside, birds are beginning their daily chorus. The fog is lifting, revealing patches of pale blue sky. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimes the hour with soft bronze notes that seem to float on the autumn air. He thinks of his childhood then, as he often does when the weight of the world feels too heavy to bear. He remembers lying in his small bed in his parents' house, listening to similar church bells on quiet Sunday mornings, his mother's voice drifting up from the kitchen, humming an old lullaby as she prepared breakfast, the smell of fresh bread and coffee, the sound of his father's footsteps on the wooden stairs, careful and measured, trying not to wake anyone. Those were nights when sleep came easily, when the worst thing he could imagine was a thunderstorm or a scraped knee. Now, as he sits in this tent on the edge of a battlefield, with letters full of dire warnings scattered across his makeshift desk, he wonders if the world will ever feel that safe again. The doctor opens his diary once more and dips his pen in the small bottle of ink beside the lamp. The nib scratches softly against the paper as he begins to write, his words flowing like a gentle stream in the growing morning light. October 29th, 1918. Dawn breaks clear after yesterday's fog, and with it comes news of home. The letters speak of a new enemy, one that cannot be fought with bullets or bayonets. I prepare to return to a world that thought it had seen the worst of suffering, only to discover that sometimes peace can be more frightening than war. Tonight, I will pack my instruments and my medicines. Tomorrow, I begin the journey home to face whatever waits in the quiet spaces between the ending of one nightmare and the beginning of another. The pen pauses on the page. Outside, the camp continues its gentle awakening, and somewhere, carried on the morning breeze, comes the faint sound of coughing from the direction of town. This is what the illness does. It takes not just strength, but something deeper, some essential vitality that leaves its survivors feeling like shadows of themselves. He adjusts Thomas's pillows, helping the old man sit up slightly to ease his breathing. That feeling will pass, the doctor assures him, though he's not entirely certain this is true. Your body is healing. Rest is what you need now. My cows, Thomas murmurs, his eyes drifting toward the window where darkness has settled over the town. They need milking. Your grandson is taking care of everything, the doctor tells him. The animals are fed and safe. You don't need to worry about anything except getting well. Thomas nods slowly, his eyes already beginning to close again. The doctor remains beside him for a few more minutes, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, watching the peaceful expression that settles over the old man's face as sleep takes hold. Across the aisle, in a bed positioned where the lamplight falls most gently, lies Corporal James Henderson, recently returned from the Western Front. Unlike the others, James is awake, staring at the ceiling with the peculiar intensity of someone whose mind cannot find rest. His uniform jacket hangs on a peg beside his bed, the fabric bearing the stains and tears of months in the trenches. "Can't sleep?" the doctor asks, pulling his chair to the space between James's bed and the next. "Sleep's hard to come by these days," James replies. His voice carries the hoarse quality that the doctor has learned to recognize, not just from illness, but from too many months of breathing smoke and poison gas. Keep thinking I should be somewhere else. The doctor understands this too. So many of the soldiers who have returned carry this restlessness, this sense that peace is somehow unnatural, that quiet is more frightening than the noise of battle. You're exactly where you should be, he says gently. Part 2. The doctor's first cases. 3 weeks have passed since our doctor returned from the front, and the small-town hospital where he now works has transformed into something he scarcely recognizes. What was once a quiet place of healing, where broken bones were set and babies delivered, has become a sanctuary for those fighting an invisible enemy that strikes without warning and shows no mercy. The makeshift ward stretches through what was once the hospital's main corridor, lined with beds that were hastily assembled from whatever materials could be found. Wooden cots borrowed from the local army barracks, soft mattresses donated by families throughout the town, and clean white sheets that the local women's auxiliary has sewn by hand. Working through the night by lamplight to ensure there are always fresh linens for those who need them. It is early evening now, and the doctor makes his rounds, as he has every night since arriving. The autumn sun has set behind the tall windows, leaving the ward bathed in the warm, golden glow of oil lamps positioned carefully between each bed. The light flickers gently against the whitewashed walls. His first stop is always the smallest bed, tucked into the corner where the sounds of the ward are muffled and the light is softest. Here lies a child of perhaps 7 years old, a little girl named Emma, whose parents brought her in 3 days ago when her fever began to climb beyond anything they could manage at home. Her blonde hair, damp with perspiration, fans across the pillow like spilled sunlight, and her small chest rises and falls with the effort of breathing. The doctor approaches slowly, his footsteps muffled by the thick rug that someone has placed beside her bed. He carries his medical bag in one hand and a small lantern in the other, its flame enclosed in clear glass that casts a steady, peaceful light. Setting the lantern on the wooden nightstand, he opens his bag with practiced quiet, each instrument arranged precisely where he can find it without making unnecessary noise. The stethoscope emerges first, its metal cool to the touch. He warms it gently between his palms before placing it against the child's chest, listening to the rhythm of her heart, quick but steady, like the wings of a small bird. The sound of her breathing fills his ears. Not the clear, easy flow of healthy lungs, but something more labored, more congested. Still, she sleeps peacefully, her face relaxed despite the fever that colors her cheeks. "There now, little one," he whispers, his voice barely audible above the soft sounds of the ward. "Just rest, just breathe." He adjusts her blanket, tucking it gently around her shoulders, and checks the small glass of water on her nightstand. Emma stirs slightly at his touch, her eyelids fluttering open for just a moment. "Papa," she asks, her voice rough and small. "She," the doctor murmurs, placing a cool cloth on her forehead. "Papa will be here in the morning. Sleep now." The child's cough comes then, a low, gravelly sound that seems far too large for such a small body. It shakes her tiny frame for a moment before subsiding, leaving her breathing more heavily than before. The doctor makes a note of this in his mental catalogue. The cough is deeper today, more persistent. He will record this later when his rounds are complete and he returns to his writing desk. Moving to the next bed, he finds Thomas Mueller, an elderly farmer whose weathered hands rest folded across his chest, like he's already practicing for his eternal rest. Thomas came to the hospital 2 days ago, brought by his grandson, who found him collapsed in his barn while tending to the evening milking. His fever had broken that morning, a promising sign, but the doctor knows better than to trust such temporary victories. "Good evening, Thomas," the doctor says softly, settling into the wooden chair beside the bed. The old man's eyes open slowly, focusing with some difficulty on his visitor. "Doctor," Thomas replies, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Still here, I see. Still here, indeed." The doctor checks the man's pulse, counting the beats against his pocket watch. "How are you feeling tonight? Any better?" Thomas considers this question seriously, as farmers do with all important matters. "The fever's gone," he says, finally, "but I feel ... empty, like something's been hollowed out of me." The doctor nods, understanding. At the third doorway, they find Mr. James Whitmore, an elderly farmer whose weathered hands rest peacefully on the coverlet of his bed. His wife of 43 years sits beside him, her gray hair braided down her back, her fingers moving slowly through the beads of a worn rosary. She looks up as the doctor approaches, her blue eyes bright with gratitude despite her obvious weariness. "He's been resting well, doctor," she reports quietly. "The cough is much less frequent now, and he even managed a bit of soup this evening." She reaches for her husband's hand, intertwining their fingers with the natural ease of decades of shared affection. "We've been married so long, I sometimes think we breathe with the same lungs." The doctor checks Mr. Whitmore's pulse and temperature, pleased to find both much improved from the previous evening. As he works, Mrs. Whitmore begins to speak in soft tones about their farm. The apple trees heavy with fruit, the harvest almost complete. Before James fell ill, the neighbor who has promised to tend their animals until they can return home. "I keep thinking about our old rooster, Sergeant," she says, with a gentle laugh. "James named him that because he always wakes the whole farm at dawn, just like a military bugle. I wonder if he's still doing his job, or if he's missing us too much to crow properly." Her husband's eyes flutter open at the sound of her laughter, and he manages a weak smile. "That rooster," he whispers, his voice rough but filled with affection, "probably thinks he's in charge of the whole county by now." His wife leans down to kiss his forehead, and in that simple gesture, the doctor sees the kind of love that makes all suffering bearable. As the night deepens further, the doctor continues his rounds, moving from room to room like a gentle guardian angel. Each visit follows the same comforting pattern: the soft approach with his lamp, the quiet assessment of each patient's condition, the few words of encouragement offered in his calm, steady voice. In one room, he finds young Timothy Brooks, a soldier returned from the front lines, only to be struck down by this new enemy. The boy, for he is little more than a boy, perhaps 19 years old, lies propped up on pillows to ease his breathing. His mother has traveled from 3 counties away to be with him, and she sits knitting by his bedside, her needles clicking together in a rhythm that matches the ticking of the distant clock. "I'm making him a scarf," she explains quietly to the doctor as he checks Timothy's breathing, "a blue one, like his eyes. He'll need it when he comes home for Christmas." Her voice carries a fierce determination, as if the very act of planning for the future can ensure that future will come to pass. Timothy opens his eyes and reaches for his mother's hand. "Tell me again about the kitchen garden," he whispers, "about the tomatoes and the beans." And so she does, her voice painting pictures of home in soft, loving detail. She speaks of early morning visits to the garden, dew still sparkling on the vegetable leaves, of tomatoes red as rubies hanging heavy on their vines, of green bean rows stretching toward the sunrise like neat green fences, of the old tabby cat who likes to sleep among the pumpkin plants on warm afternoons. As she speaks, Timothy's breathing grows easier and his eyes begin to drift closed once more. The doctor adjusts his pillows slightly and checks the level of medicine in the bottle on the nightstand. "You rest now," he says gently. "We're here. Your mother is here. The garden is waiting for you." The hallway stretches on, and with it, more rooms, more patients, more quiet stories of courage and hope. In each chamber, the doctor leaves something of himself, a moment of genuine attention, a word of comfort, a touch that conveys healing beyond anything his medicines can provide. After each visit, he returns to his small writing table at the end of the corridor, where his diary waits beneath the steady glow of a brass lamp. His hands, now stained faintly with iodine and marked by the oils from various medicines, take up his pen with practiced ease. The nib scratches softly against the paper as he records not just medical observations, but the human moments that give meaning to all his work. November 2nd, he writes, "Mrs. Hartwell dreamed of apple orchards tonight. Little Mary's fever has broken, and her mother sings of angels. Mr. Whitmore speaks of roosters and harvest time, while his wife counts her blessings on worn rosary beads. Timothy Brooks listens to stories of garden vegetables and plans for Christmas scarves. In each room, I find the same medicine at work, the healing power of love, of memory, of hope that reaches beyond the darkness." The pen pauses, and he listens to the sounds of the night around him. The grandfather clock continues its patient ticking. Rain patters gently against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls to its mate with a voice like liquid silver. "The work continues," he writes finally. "Room by room, patient by patient, we tend the small flames of life that burn so bravely in the darkness. Each breath is a victory, each smile is a triumph. Each gentle word passed between loved ones is a prayer answered in the most ordinary and most miraculous way." He sets down his pen and leans back in his chair, feeling the familiar ache in his shoulders that comes from long hours of bending over bedsides. Outside, the night is deep and still, but here, in this quiet corridor, surrounded by the soft sounds of healing and hope, he feels a profound sense of peace. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new patience, new sorrows to bear, and small joys to celebrate. But tonight, in this moment, all is well. The lamps burn steady and true. The patients rest beneath clean blankets. Love keeps watch at every bedside. And in his diary, the gentle doctor records it all. This quiet symphony of human care, played out note by note in the deepest hours of the night. Part 3. Candles and quiet. Caring for the sick, the night deepens now, and we find ourselves walking beside our gentle doctor through the hushed corridors of the makeshift hospital. The hallways stretch before us like rivers of shadow, illuminated only by the soft glow of a single oil lamp that he carries in his steady hand. Each footstep echoes softly on the wooden planks beneath his feet, a rhythmic, comforting sound that speaks of purpose and presence in the darkness. The lamp casts a warm circle of amber light that dances with each step, painting the walls in shades of honey and gold. Long shadows reach behind him like gentle fingers, and ahead, doorways appear and disappear in the flickering illumination. The air here is thick with the scent of carbolic soap and lavender oil, mingling with the earthier smells of wood smoke and autumn rain that seeps through the walls. As he moves through this quiet sanctuary, the doctor's face remains calm and serene, etched by lamplight into an expression of infinite patience. His medical bag rests securely in his free hand, its leather worn smooth by countless nights like this one. The weight of it has become as familiar as his own heartbeat, and within it rests the simple tools of his trade: thermometer and stethoscope, bottles of tincture and packets of powdered medicine, clean bandages folded with precise care. From somewhere in the distance comes the gentle tick-tick-tick of the ward's old grandfather clock, its bronze pendulum swinging back and forth with metronomic precision. The sound creates a peaceful rhythm that underlies everything else. The soft whisper of breath from sleeping patients, the occasional rustle of bedsheets, the barely audible murmur of a nurse speaking words of comfort in a nearby room. The doctor pauses at the first doorway and raises his lamp slightly, peering into the small chamber beyond. Here lies Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a young wife whose husband departed for the front lines just 3 months ago. She rests beneath a quilt sewn with tiny blue flowers, her dark hair spread across a white pillow like spilled ink. Her breathing is shallow but steady, and in her hands she clutches a small leather Bible, its pages worn thin from constant reading. The doctor steps quietly into the room, setting his lamp on the small wooden table beside her bed. The light reveals her pale features, peaceful in sleep, despite the fever that has burned within her for 4 days now. On the nightstand, beside a glass of water and a bottle of medicine, sits an open letter, the last correspondence from her husband, written in a careful hand that speaks of love and longing for home. She stirs slightly as the lamplight touches her face, and her eyes flutter open, deep brown eyes that reflect the flame-like pools of warm chocolate. "Doctor," she whispers, her voice barely audible above the sound of rain beginning to patter against the window. "Is it very late?" "Not so very late," he replies softly, settling into the chair beside her bed. His voice carries the weight of genuine kindness, the sort of tone one might use to comfort a frightened child during a thunderstorm. "How are you feeling, my dear? Any change in the pain?" She manages a small smile, though it costs her considerable effort. "Better, I think. I dreamed of Thomas, my husband. We were walking through the apple orchard behind my father's house, and the trees were heavy with fruit. The sun was warm on our faces, and there was no war anywhere in the world." The doctor nods, reaching into his bag for his stethoscope. "Dreams of home are precious medicine," he says gently. "They remind us of what waits beyond these walls." He listens to her breathing, counting the beats of her heart with practiced attention. The sound is stronger tonight than it was yesterday, and this small improvement fills him with quiet satisfaction. As he prepares to leave, Mrs. Hartwell reaches for her Bible and opens it to a passage marked with a pressed violet. In a voice barely above a whisper, she begins to read, "He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber." The words seem to float in the lamplight, carrying with them a comfort that transcends their simple meaning. The doctor pauses in the doorway, listening to her gentle recitation. When she finishes, he says simply, "You rest now, Mrs. Hartwell. We're here. We're watching over you." She nods and closes her eyes, the Bible still resting on her chest like a talisman against the darkness. Moving on through the corridor, the doctor's lamp illuminates more doorways, more small sanctuaries where the sick find what peace they can. At the next room, he encounters Nurse Catherine Mills, a young woman whose auburn hair is pinned back beneath a starched white cap. She emerges from the chamber carrying a tray bearing an empty bowl and a folded towel, her movements careful and deliberate despite her obvious exhaustion. "Doctor," she says quietly, her Irish accent lending a musical quality to her words. "I've just finished with little Mary Patterson. The fever broke about an hour ago, and she's sleeping peacefully now. Her mother is with her." The doctor sets his lamp on the hallway table and accepts the cup of warm broth that Nurse Mills offers him from her tray. The liquid is rich and nourishing, tasting of beef bones and herbs, and its warmth spreads through his chest like a small fire. "Thank you," he murmurs. "And how are you holding up, Catherine? You've been on your feet for nearly 18 hours. She brushes a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her hand. "I'm well enough, Doctor. There's something peaceful about these night hours, isn't there? When the worst of the day's fears have settled, and we can simply tend to the business of healing." Together, they peer into the room where little Mary Patterson sleeps. The child, no more than 4 years old, lies curled beneath a blanket knitted in soft yellow wool. Her mother, a woman perhaps 30 years of age, sits in a chair pulled close to the bed, one hand resting gently on her daughter's forehead. In the other hand, she holds a book of children's verses, and she hums softly under her breath, an old lullaby that speaks of sleepy lambs and gentle shepherds. "Hush now, my little dove," the mother whispers, her voice carrying all the tenderness in the world. "The angels are watching over you tonight. They're singing you to sleep with their silver voices, and tomorrow the sun will shine again." The child's breathing is deep and regular, and occasionally a small smile crosses her sleeping features, as if she can hear those angel voices in her dreams. The doctor and nurse withdraw quietly, leaving mother and child to their peaceful vigil. As they walk further down the hallway, their footsteps create a gentle rhythm on the wooden floor. Step, pause, step, pause, like a heartbeat made audible in the darkness. From outside comes the distant whistle of a late train, its voice carrying across the sleeping countryside like a lonely song. The sound is oddly comforting, reminding them that beyond these walls, the world continues its patient turning. Somewhere that train carries letters from loved ones, packages of food and medicine, perhaps even passengers returning home after long absences. Marcus's face brightens slightly, the fever flush in his cheeks seeming almost healthy for a moment. Benedict, in Much Ado About Nothing, such wit, such joy in the language. "I had rather hear my dog bark at a crow than a man swear he loves me." Even weakened by illness, his training shows through. The words carry their intended humor, drawing a genuine smile from the doctor. As the night deepens, the doctor moves between more beds, each one representing a life interrupted, a story temporarily paused. There is Mrs. Abigail Dawson, the town's beloved piano teacher, whose fingers that once danced across ivory keys now rest folded on her chest, occasionally moving as if she's playing silent melodies in her dreams. When the doctor checks her pulse, she stirs and whispers, "The children, are they still practicing their scales?" Every day, the doctor assures her, though he knows that the music lessons, like so many other activities, have been suspended. They're waiting for you to return. Mrs. Patterson told me her daughter asks every morning when she can play for Elise, for you again. In another bed lies Henry Walsh, a young man barely 20 who enlisted in the army just as the war ended, only to find himself fighting a different battle entirely. His breathing is labored, and perspiration beads on his forehead, despite the cool night air. The doctor wipes the young man's brow with a damp cloth, the gesture automatic and gentle. "My unit," Henry whispers, his eyes seeking the doctor's face in the lamplight. "They made it through the war. We all made it through. How is it possible that this," his voice trails off, unable to finish the thought. The doctor continues his gentle ministrations, adjusting Henry's blankets and checking the level of medicine in the glass beside his bed. "Sometimes," he says quietly, "the battles we don't expect are the hardest ones to fight, but you're not fighting alone. Your strength got you through the war. That same strength will see you through this." Throughout the ward, a subtle symphony of sound creates its own kind of music. The soft whisper of breath moving in and out of tired lungs. The gentle rustle of bedsheets as patients shift in their sleep. The barely audible murmur of prayers being whispered in half a dozen languages, Latin and German, Irish, Gaelic, and Polish English, spoken with accents that tell stories of families who came to this town from distant shores seeking new lives. The doctor notices how this overlay of sound creates something almost like a lullaby, not the sweet simplicity of a children's song, but something deeper and more complex. It speaks of shared struggle, of human resilience, of the profound comfort that comes from knowing one is not alone in the darkness. Even the occasional sob that escapes from behind a drawn curtain becomes part of this gentle chorus, a note of grief that somehow harmonizes with the surrounding sounds of hope. As he makes his way between the beds, the doctor carries with him not just his medical bag and lamp, but an infinite capacity for small kindnesses. Here, he pauses to straighten a crooked photograph on a nightstand, a family portrait that obviously brings comfort to its owner. There, he retrieves a dropped handkerchief and places it within easy reach of a patient's trembling hand. Each gesture is automatic, born from weeks of understanding what truly helps in the healing process. At the bedside of Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, whom we met earlier in his rounds, the doctor finds a scene that has become increasingly common. Eleanor's condition has worsened slightly, her breathing more labored than it was the previous evening, but she is not alone. 3 other women from the town have gathered around her bed, having received special permission to visit during the quiet night hours. They sit in a small circle, their chairs drawn close together, their voices barely above a whisper as they share memories of happier times. Mrs. Patterson speaks of the church social, where Eleanor and her husband Thomas first danced together. Mrs. Morrison describes Eleanor's wedding dress, which she herself had helped to sew. Young Mary Walsh, despite her own recent recovery, tells the story of how Eleanor had helped her prepare for her teaching examination, patient and encouraging, even when Mary thought she would never master arithmetic. "Remember," Mary says softly, "how you told me that every problem has a solution. You just have to be willing to look at it from different angles. I think about that every day in my classroom now." Eleanor's eyes remain closed, but a small smile crosses her lips, and her breathing seems to ease slightly as she listens to these gentle reminiscences. The doctor checks her pulse, pleased to find it stronger than he expected, and realizes once again how much healing happens through love rather than medicine. As midnight approaches and then passes, the doctor finds himself returning again and again to his writing desk, drawn there by an increasingly urgent need to record not just the medical details of each case, but the human moments that give them meaning. His diary entries have grown longer, more detailed, as if he is trying to capture something essential about these nights that might otherwise be lost to time. He writes by the gentle glow of a candle now, having switched from the oil lamp to conserve fuel for the patient areas. The wax drips slowly down the brass holder, creating small pools that harden into abstract sculptures. The flame flickers occasionally when a draft finds its way through the old building's walls, but it never quite goes out, providing just enough light for his pen to find its way across the page. November 3rd, he writes, and then pauses, searching for words adequate to the night he has witnessed. The theater has come to us, not on a stage, but in the quiet dramas that play out beside each bed. Mr. Beaumont speaks of Hamlet while fighting his own questions of mortality. Mrs. Dawson's fingers move to silent music that exists only in her memory. The hardware store owner listens to news of spelling contests and prize pumpkins as if they were reports from paradise itself. The pen scratches softly across the paper, the only sound in this small circle of candlelight. Outside, a church bell tolls the hour, 1 o'clock in the morning, its bronze voice carrying across the sleeping town with a sound both solemn and comforting. I find myself thinking, the doctor continues writing, about the nature of courage. We speak so often of battlefield bravery, of men charging into enemy fire. But here, I witness a different kind of valor. The courage to breathe when breathing is difficult, to hope when hope seems foolish, to maintain faith in tomorrow when today brings such struggle. A tear falls onto the page as he writes, the salt water creating a small circle that spreads slightly through the ink. He doesn't pause to wipe it away, but continues writing around it, incorporating even this moment of emotion into his record of the night. Mrs. Hartwell's friends gathered around her bed tonight, creating a circle of memory and love that seemed more powerful than any medicine in my bag. They spoke of wedding dresses and church socials, of teaching examinations and dance partners. In their voices, I heard the sound of a community refusing to let one of its own face the darkness alone. The candle flame dances as he writes, creating shifting shadows that move across the pages of his diary like living things. The wax continues its slow descent, marking time in its own patient way. From somewhere in the ward comes the sound of someone coughing, not the harsh, desperate sound of severe illness, but the gentler cough of someone whose body is beginning to heal. The young soldier, Henry Walsh, asked me tonight how it was possible that he survived the war, only to face this new battle, the doctor writes. I found myself thinking of an answer long after I had given him what comfort I could. Perhaps it is because the war prepared him, not for this specific struggle, but for the knowledge that survival requires both strength and surrender, both fighting and acceptance. The night stretches on, seeming almost endless in its depth and quiet. But rather than feeling oppressive, this sense of time suspended creates a peaceful cocoon around the hospital. Here, in these hushed corridors and lamplit rooms, normal rules don't apply. Day and night blur together into something more like a gentle twilight that allows for healing to happen at its own pace. The doctor rises from his writing desk and walks once more through the ward, his footsteps creating the same soft rhythm on the wooden floors. At each bedside, he pauses to check on his patients, adjusting a blanket here, refilling a water glass there, simply resting a gentle hand on a forehead to provide the comfort of human contact. At Henry Walsh's bedside, he finds the young soldier awake, staring at the ceiling with eyes that reflect the nearby lamplight like small stars. "Can't sleep?" the doctor asks softly, settling into the chair beside the bed. "I keep thinking about my company," Henry replies, his voice stronger than it was earlier in the evening. "We used to take turns keeping watch at night, someone always awake, always listening for danger. I suppose it's hard to break the habit." The doctor nods, understanding. "Would it help to know that someone is keeping watch here too? That you don't need to stay alert anymore?" Henry turns his head to look at the doctor, and some of the tension leaves his face. "You don't sleep at all, do you?" "I sleep," the doctor says, with a gentle smile. "Just not very much during times like these. But I don't mind. There's something peaceful about these night hours, when the world is quiet and we can focus on the essential work of healing." As he speaks, the doctor realizes the truth of his own words. Despite the long hours and the weight of responsibility, despite the tears that sometimes fall onto his diary pages, he has found something approaching contentment in this work. Each night brings its own challenges, but also its own small miracles. A fever that breaks, a cough that eases, a patient who manages their first real smile in days. The night continues its patient progress toward dawn, and with it, the doctor's gentle vigil goes on. His presence moves through the ward like a soft current of peace, touching each patient with the assurance that they are not forgotten, not alone, not beyond the reach of human care. In his diary, the pages continue to fill with observations and reflections, creating a record that is both deeply personal and profoundly universal. These are the stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances with grace and courage, tended by a physician whose greatest tool is not any medicine in his bag, but the simple revolutionary act of paying attention to each soul in his care. The candle burns lower, but it does not go out. The night grows deeper, but it does not become frightening. And in the gentle repetition of his rounds, check the pulse, adjust the pillows, offer a word of comfort, return to write in the diary. The doctor creates a rhythm as soothing and reliable as any lullaby ever sung. Part 4. Echoes of Night. The toll rises. The calendar on the Dr.'s desk shows the final days of October slipping away like leaves carried on an autumn wind. And with each passing night, the world outside grows quieter, more watchful, as if the very air holds its breath in anticipation of what morning might bring. The pandemic's grip tightens like frost settling over the countryside, invisible but undeniably present, touching every corner of the small town with its cold fingers. From the hospital's tall windows, the doctor can see the empty streets stretching away into darkness, where once carriages rattled over cobblestones and neighbors called greetings to one another from their front porches. Now only silence reigns. The shutters of houses stand closed like sleeping eyes, and the gas lamps that line the main thoroughfare illuminate nothing but empty sidewalks and the occasional drift of fallen leaves. Even the horses seem to sense the change in the air. Their hooves, when heard at all, strike the pavement with a muffled, hesitant rhythm, as if their riders guide them quickly past each darkened doorway. The clip-clop that once provided such a cheerful soundtrack to daily life has become sparse and hurried, punctuated by long stretches of profound quiet. But in those rare windows where lamplight still glows, small golden rectangles scattered across the sleeping town like scattered coins, the doctor knows that dramas of love and loss play out in hushed voices. Behind those lit panes of glass, families gather around sick BDs, keeping their own gentle vigils. Mothers rock fevered children. Wives hold their husbands' hands through long, dark hours. Sons and daughters read aloud from favorite books, their voices creating bridges of comfort across the chasm of illness. Back within the hospital walls, the steady rhythm of arrivals has increased. What began as a trickle of patients has become a steady stream. Each new arrival bringing their own story of how the invisible enemy found them. The wards that once seemed spacious now feel crowded, though the staff moves with such practiced quiet that even a full room maintains an atmosphere of peaceful sanctuary. Tonight, the doctor encounters faces he recognizes from the town's daily life, people who just weeks ago went about their ordinary business with no thought that their names would soon be written in his leather-bound journal. There is Mr. Frederick Mills, who ran the hardware store on Main Street with such pride, now lying beneath thick wool blankets, his strong hands that once measured nails and rope now trembling with fever. His wife sits beside him, reading aloud from the town newspaper, her voice painting pictures of a world that continues beyond these walls. "Listen to this, dear," she says softly, her finger tracing the printed lines. "Mrs. Henderson's prize pumpkin weighed 47 pounds this year. Can you imagine? And the Smithson boy? You remember little Billy? He won the spelling contest at the schoolhouse. His word was perseverance, and he spelled it perfectly on the first try." Mr. Mills manages a weak smile, his eyes focusing on his wife's face with obvious effort. "Good for Billy," he whispers. "Always was a bright child. His father will be proud." The simple conversation carries within it all the weight of normalcy, of a world where spelling contests and prize pumpkins matter more than fevers and labored breathing. In the bed beside Mr. Mills lies someone whose arrival surprised everyone, Marcus Beaumont, the lead actor from the traveling theater company that had been performing Shakespeare in the town hall. The man who just a week ago commanded the stage with his powerful voice and commanding presence now speaks only in whispers, his breath coming in short, careful measures. "The show," he murmurs to the doctor during the evening rounds. "It must go on. The company, where are they?" The doctor adjusts Marcus's pillows, helping him find a more comfortable position. "There in the rooms down the hall," he says gently. "3 of your fellow actors are here, recovering just as you are. The others are staying at the boarding house, following the quarantine guidelines. But they send word every day. They're waiting for you, all of them." Marcus closes his eyes, and for a moment the doctor sees not the fevered patient, but the artist beneath. Someone whose entire life has been built around bringing stories to life for others. "We were performing Hamlet," Marcus says, his voice carrying a trace of its former richness. "I was in the middle of the soliloquy, to be or not to be, when the coughing started. The irony wasn't lost on me." The doctor sits quietly beside the actor's bed, understanding that sometimes the best medicine is simply the gift of attention. "What was your favorite role?" he asks. Part 5, The Haunted Diary, Writing Through the Night. In the deepest heart of night, when the world has settled into its most profound quiet, we find ourselves drawn into the most intimate corner of our story, the small circle of lamplight, where our gentle doctor sits with his diary. transforming the weight of witnessed suffering into something bearable through the simple act of setting pen to paper. The oil lamp beside him crackles softly as he settles into his chair, the flame dancing within its glass chimney like a tiny captive spirit. The sound is barely perceptible, a whispered conversation between wick and fuel that speaks of warmth and light persisting against the darkness. As he adjusts the lamp's position, the brass base catches the glow and throws it back in gentle curves of reflected gold, creating a sanctuary of illumination in the vast quiet of the sleeping hospital. His hands, marked now by the honest stains of his work, traces of iodine beneath his fingernails, the faint yellow tinge of sulfur powder on his fingertips, small cuts from broken medicine bottles that have healed into thin white lines, reach for the feather quill that has become as familiar to him as any medical instrument. The quill itself tells a story, its white shaft worn smooth by countless nights of use, its tip maintained with the careful precision of someone who understands that words, like medicines, must flow cleanly to be effective. The diary lies open before him, its leather binding softened by handling, its pages heavy with the weight of witnessed humanity. The paper itself has taken on the character of these nights, slightly yellowed by lamplight, faintly scented with the mixture of ink and medicine that has become the perfume of his existence. Some pages bear the telltale circles where tears have fallen, creating small maps of sorrow that have dried into permanent testimony to the emotions that fuel his writing. As he dips the quill into the small glass inkwell, black ink that gleams like liquid starlight in the lamp's glow, the faint scratching sound it makes against the paper creates its own form of music. Scratch, pause, scratch. The rhythm varies with his thoughts, sometimes flowing like water when the words come easily, sometimes hesitant and broken when he struggles to capture experiences that seem almost too profound for language. The scent that surrounds him tells the story of his nights, the sharp, clean smell of carbolic acid that clings to his clothes, the earthy sweetness of the herbal tinctures he prepares by lamplight, the metallic tang of the instruments in his bag, and underneath it all, the comforting smell of ink and paper that speaks of thoughts being preserved, of experiences being transformed from raw emotion into something that can be borne. Tonight, as he has every night for weeks now, he begins by reading what he has already written, his lips moving silently as his eyes trace the familiar words. The lamplight reveals pages filled with his careful script, each entry a small window into a soul that refuses to be hardened by the suffering it witnesses daily. October 15th, he reads in the whispered voice that has become his dialogue with the darkness. Little Thomas Brennan asked me today if angels have medicine bags. I told him I thought they might, but that their medicine was made of different things, laughter and sunlight and the sound of mothers singing. He nodded very seriously and said he thought that sounded like better medicine than what I carry. His finger traces the words as he reads, and a small smile crosses his tired features. Even in the midst of the most difficult period of his medical career, the children continue to surprise him with their profound wisdom, their ability to find magic in the most ordinary moments. October 20, Twand, he continues reading. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell died at dawn today, but not before she saw her husband return from the front. They had 3 hours together, 3 hours in which a lifetime of love was spoken in whispers and touches. I watched Thomas hold her hand as she slipped away, and I understood something about the mathematics of love. That 3 hours can contain more than 50 years. If the hearts involved are brave enough to pour themselves completely into the time they have. The words blur slightly as he reads them, not from any fault in his vision, but from the tears that gather unbidden whenever he revisits these moments of profound grace. Each entry in his diary represents not just a medical case, but a human soul who has taught him something about the nature of courage, hope, and love. He turns the page and reads on, his voice barely audible even to himself. November, honest. The night is long, but even longer is the love we hold for those still breathing. I find myself thinking tonight about the persistence of tenderness, how it survives war and plague and exhaustion, how it appears in the smallest gestures, a hand smoothing a fevered brow, a voice reading familiar stories to calm frightened minds, a song hummed softly in the darkness to convince someone that they are not alone. The quill finds the inkwell again, and he begins tonight's entry, the familiar ritual soothing his mind, even as it challenges him to find words adequate to the experiences of the day. The flame flickers slightly as a draft finds its way through the old building, causing the shadows to dance across the pages like living things. November 4th, he writes, and then pauses, listening to the sounds that surround him. From the ward comes the gentle symphony of sleeping patience, the soft whisper of breath, the occasional rustle of bedsheets, the distant murmur of a nurse speaking words of comfort to someone who has awakened in distress. These sounds have become the soundtrack of his existence, more familiar to him now than the songs his mother used to sing. I write by the light of a dying moon tonight, he continues, glancing up at the window where the pale orb hangs like a worn silver coin in the dark sky. She has been my companion through these long hours, this silent sentinel who watches over the sleeping and the suffering alike. I find myself speaking to her sometimes, this moon, telling her things I cannot say to any living soul, about the weight of carrying so many stories, so many hopes and fears. The scratch of the quill becomes more rhythmic as the words begin to flow, and he finds himself entering that state of communion with his own thoughts that has become essential to his survival. Writing has become more than a record-keeping exercise. It has become a form of prayer, a way of processing experiences that might otherwise crush him beneath their accumulated weight. Young Marcus Beaumont, the actor, spoke tonight of the strange poetry of illness. He writes, he said that fever dreams have taught him things about language that years of studying Shakespeare never could. In dreams, he told me, words become colors, and colors become music. And sometimes I understand meanings that my waking mind could never grasp. I find myself wondering if this diary serves a similar purpose, transforming the chaos of experience into something that resembles understanding. As he writes, the boundaries between memory and present moment begin to blur. The faces of his patients appear in the lamplight like gentle ghosts, not frightening apparitions, but beloved presences who have entrusted him with their stories. Miss Hartwell sits in the chair across from him, her Bible open on her lap, reading verses about still waters and green pastures. Little Thomas Brennan perches on the edge of the desk, swinging his legs and asking earnest questions about angel medicine. The dying moon outside the window seems to lean closer, as if trying to read over his shoulder. In his fatigue-softened state of consciousness, he can almost believe that she is truly his companion. This ancient traveler who has watched over countless nights of human suffering and healing throughout the long history of the world. The children haunt my dreams, he writes, but not in the way one might expect. They appear not as victims of this plague, but as teachers, wise souls temporarily housed in small bodies, offering lessons about resilience and hope that my medical training never covered. Sarah Morrison's baby, born 3 weeks ago despite her mother's illness, seems to smile, even in her sleep, as if she knows something about the nature of life that the rest of us have forgotten. The ink flows across the page like dark water, carrying with it all the observations and reflections that have accumulated during another long night of tending the sick. Each word is chosen with care, not because he expects anyone else to read these pages, but because the act of choosing precise language forces him to examine his own experiences more deeply. I realize tonight that I have become a collector of last words and first words, he continues writing. The final whispered endearments of the dying, and the hesitant questions of those beginning to recover. Both carry equal weight in my heart, the profound completion of a life fully lived, and the tentative hope of a life being reclaimed from the edge of darkness. The lamp burns lower, its flame shrinking slightly as the oil is consumed, but there is still enough light for writing, still enough warmth to keep the night's chill at bay. The doctor adjusts his position in the chair, his back aching from the long hours, but his hand steady as it guides the quill across the page. As he writes, fragments of dreams begin to intrude on his consciousness, not the nightmares one might expect from someone who has witnessed so much suffering, but something gentler and more healing. In these half-waking visions, his patients appear not as they are in their illness, but as they were in health, or as they will be when they recover. He sees Mrs. Dawson at her piano, her fingers dancing across the keys as a room full of children sing along to a familiar melody. Thomas Brennan runs through a field of tall grass, his laughter carried on a warm summer breeze. Marcus Beaumont takes the stage again, his voice strong and sure as he delivers lines that speak of love, conquering death, and hope triumphing over despair. These dreams, he writes, pausing to capture the vision before it fades, are perhaps the greatest gift this work has given me. The ability to see beyond the present moment of suffering to the restored wholeness that waits on the other side. In my sleep, nightmares transform into gentle dreams on paper, scenes of healing and reunion that remind me why we persist in this work, even when the darkness seems overwhelming. The quill finds the inkwell again, and he continues writing, his words now flowing with the rhythm of someone who has found his way into the deepest truth of his experience. Writing has become my refuge, the place where I can transform the horrors I have witnessed into something bearable. Each word I set down on paper is an act of defiance against despair, a small victory of hope over fear. Outside, the moon continues her patient journey across the sky, growing paler as she approaches the western horizon. Soon, dawn will begin to touch the eastern edges of the world, bringing with it another day of small battles fought with love instead of weapons. But for now, in this circle of lamplight, in the gentle company of ink and paper and memories, the doctor continues his nightly ritual of bearing witness to the profound courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. The diary pages turn slowly under his hand, revealing the accumulated weight of weeks of careful observation. Here, a pressed flower left by a grateful patient. There, a child's drawing given as payment when money was not available. Each page tells not just the story of illness and recovery, but of the countless ways that human beings reach across the darkness to touch one another with comfort and hope. The night stretches on, he writes as the lamp flame flickers lower, but I am not alone in it. In these pages, I carry the voices of all those who have trusted me with their stories. Their courage becomes my courage, their hope becomes my hope, and in the morning, when I rise to begin another day of healing, I will carry with me not the weight of what I have witnessed, but the strength that comes from knowing how beautifully human beings can love one another, even in the darkest of times. The quill rests for a moment, and in the silence that follows, the doctor listens to the world around him, the gentle breathing of sleeping patients, the distant sound of rain beginning to tap against the windows, the soft crackle of the lamp as it burns faithfully through another night of witness and writing. Tomorrow, there will be new patients to tend, new stories to collect, new entries to make in this diary that has become both refuge and testament. But tonight, in this moment of perfect quiet, he has succeeded once again in transforming experience into understanding, suffering into compassion, and the weight of the world into words that can be borne. Part 6. A New Dawn. Surviving the Storm. The calendar on the doctor's small desk turns its final page, revealing November in crisp black numerals against white paper, a simple marking of time that carries within it the weight of transformation. As the first week of this new month unfolds, something subtle but unmistakable begins to shift in the rhythm of the hospital, in the quality of the air itself, in the very nature of the silence that settles over the ward during the deepest hours of night. The cold has arrived with November, as it always does, but this year its presence feels different, not the harbinger of hardship it might once have seemed, but rather a clean, honest chill that speaks of seasons turning, of the natural order reasserting itself after weeks of unnatural disruption. When the doctor opens the tall windows each morning to let fresh air circulate through the ward, the breeze that enters carries the crisp scent of wood smoke and dying leaves, of earth preparing for winter's rest, of a world slowly returning to its ancient rhythms. The night watch has taken on a quality that the doctor finds difficult to name at first, until one evening, as he sits at his writing desk listening to the sounds around him, he realizes what has changed. The silence between sounds has grown longer, deeper, more peaceful. Where once his ears were constantly tuned to the labored breathing of the severely ill, to the restless movements of the fevered, to the whispered urgencies of crisis, now he finds himself surrounded by the gentler sounds of genuine rest. Fewer coughs break the quiet now, and when they do come, they carry a different quality, the productive clearing of healing lungs rather than the desperate gasping of systems under siege. The footsteps in the corridors have slowed from the quick, urgent pace of emergency to the measured walk of routine care. Even the lamp flames seem to burn more steadily, as if the very air has become less agitated, more conducive to calm. From his desk, the doctor can see the entire length of the main ward, and where once every bed was occupied and others waited in the hallway, now he counts empty spaces, clean, turned-down beds that speak of patients discharged to the care of recovering families, of lives reclaimed from the edge of darkness. The sight fills him with a quiet satisfaction that goes deeper than professional pride. It touches something fundamental about his understanding of what healing truly means. Those patients who remain are different now as well. Where once his bedside manner had to navigate the treacherous waters of critical illness, measuring each word, each gesture for its potential to comfort or alarm, now his interactions carry the lighter touch of convalescence. When he hands Mrs. Patterson a clean handkerchief, she uses it not to catch blood-flecked sputum, but to dab away tears of gratitude as she speaks of her plans to return to her garden in the spring. "Doctor," she says, her voice stronger than it has been in weeks, "I've been thinking about the roses. Do you suppose they survived the frost while I've been away?" Her concern for her flowers strikes him as the most beautiful sound he has heard in months. The voice of someone whose mind has moved beyond mere survival to encompass the tender details that make life worth living. When he checks young Timothy Brooks's temperature and marks it on the chart, the numbers tell a story of steady improvement rather than the precarious fluctuations that once kept him awake with worry. More importantly, Timothy himself tells stories now, gentle narratives about his plans to help his father with the spring planting, about the book his sweetheart has promised to send from the city, about the dog who waits for him at home and who, according to his mother's latest letter, still sleeps on his bed each night, as if maintaining a vigil for his return. The doctor's diary entries during these November nights begin to take on a different character, the words flowing with something that resembles not just hope, but actual joy. The leather-bound book that once felt heavy with the weight of witnessed suffering now seems to open more easily, its pages eager to receive observations that speak of recovery rather than decline, of reunion rather than separation. November 8th, he writes by the light of his faithful lamp, the flame burning clear and bright in the still air. Sunrise leaked through the window this morning, like liquid gold poured slowly from a careful hand, and I found myself thinking that I was witnessing the sun itself being born anew. The light touched Miss Morrison's face as she slept, and I saw in her peaceful expression not the mask of illness, but the face of someone dreaming of tomorrow. The scratch of his quill across the paper has become more musical now, the rhythm matching his elevated mood. Each word seems to flow more easily than the last, as if the act of recording hope requires less effort than documenting despair. The ink itself appears more brilliant in the lamplight, and even the shadows cast by his hand as he writes seem softer, less stark than they did during the darkest weeks of the outbreak. Today I witnessed something I had almost forgotten was possible. He continues writing. Laughter in the ward, not the brittle laughter of hysteria or the forced cheer of denial, but the genuine, spontaneous laughter of people rediscovering their capacity for joy. Marcus Beaumont, the actor, was regaling a small group with stories from his touring days, his voice regaining its theatrical resonance as he described a performance where the leading lady's costume caught fire during the final scene. The sound of his audience's delighted response filled the ward like music. Through the window beside his desk, the doctor can see the first hints of dawn beginning to touch the eastern horizon, not the pale, hesitant light of a sun struggling to penetrate heavy air, but the confident glow of a new day that knows it will be welcome. The darkness retreats gradually, revealing a world that has somehow survived its trial and stands ready to embrace whatever comes next. As he writes, he becomes aware of new sounds, joining the quiet symphony of the healing ward. From somewhere outside comes the tentative song of an early robin, the first he has heard in weeks, a small voice announcing that life continues its ancient patterns despite the temporary disruptions of human crisis. The bird song is joined by the distant chime of the church bell marking the dawn hour, its bronze voice carrying across the town with a tone that speaks not of mourning, but of celebration for the day's arrival. The robin outside my window sang this morning for the first time since October, he writes, pausing to listen as the bird's melody drifts through the glass. Her song reminded me that the world has been waiting patiently for us to finish this particular chapter of our story so that the larger narrative of seasons and growth and renewal could continue. I find myself grateful beyond words to have been a witness to both the darkness and the light, to have seen how much beauty human beings are capable of creating even in the midst of suffering. The doctor sets down his quill and rises from his chair, his body protesting slightly after the long hours of writing, but his spirit feeling lighter than it has in weeks. He walks quietly through the ward, his footsteps creating their familiar rhythm on the wooden floors, but now the sound speaks of completion rather than urgency, of satisfaction rather than anxiety. At each bedside, he pauses not to check for signs of crisis, but to observe the peaceful evidence of recovery. Here, Mrs. Dawson sleeps with her hands folded serenely on her chest, her breathing deep and regular, a slight smile playing around the corners of her mouth as if her dreams are filled with the music she will soon return to making. There, young Timothy sits propped against his pillows, reading a letter from home by the light of the dawn filtering through the windows, his face animated with plans and possibilities. The ward itself has taken on a different atmosphere, less like a battlefield hospital and more like a peaceful retreat where tired souls come to rest before returning to their lives. The morning light reveals details that seemed invisible during the darker weeks. The careful way the nurses have arranged small bouquets of autumn leaves in glass jars, the handmade quilts donated by women throughout the town, the children's drawings taped to the walls, colorful expressions of hope and encouragement that transform the clinical space into something approaching a home. As the doctor completes his morning rounds, he finds himself face to face with a truth that fills him with profound gratitude. The worst has passed. Not everyone has survived. His diary bears witness to losses that will forever mark his heart. But enough have lived, enough have recovered, enough have found their way back to health that the word victory seems appropriate, even if it must be whispered with humility. Returning to his desk, he dips his quill one final time and adds a closing thought to the night's entry. As I write these words, the sun rises full and strong over a world that has proven once again its remarkable capacity for survival. We have lost much during these weeks, dear friends, beloved family members, the simple innocence of a time when we believed ourselves safe from invisible enemies, but we have also gained something precious. The knowledge of how much we are capable of loving one another, how strong we can be when strength is required, how beautiful the ordinary moments of life appear when we thought we might lose them forever. The lamp beside him flickers as the growing daylight renders its flame less necessary. Soon, he will extinguish it and prepare for sleep, the restorative rest of someone whose work, while never truly finished, has reached a natural pause. The diary closes with a satisfying weight, its pages now full of the complete story of this chapter in the town's history, ready to be preserved as testimony to what human beings can endure and overcome when they face darkness together. Outside, the robin's song is joined by others, a growing chorus of voices greeting the day with enthusiasm and hope. The church bell chimes again, and this time its bronze notes seem to carry a message of thanksgiving rather than supplication. The world is healing, the storm has passed, and in the gentle light of November dawn, everything that was broken appears capable of being made whole again. The doctor smiles as he prepares to close his watch and rest, knowing that when evening comes again, his rounds will be shorter, his patients fewer, his diary entries lighter in tone and brighter in prospect. The night has been long indeed, but morning has arrived at last, bringing with it the promise that this story, like all the best stories, ends not in despair, but in hope, not in defeat, but in the quiet triumph of love persisting against all odds. Conclusion: the doctor's lullaby. And so we come to the end of our gentle journey through the autumn nights of 1918, to the final pages of a story written not in grand proclamations, but in whispered words of comfort, in the soft scratch of pen on paper, in the quiet triumph of human compassion over human suffering. The doctor sits at his familiar desk one last time, the leather-bound diary open before him to a fresh page, perhaps the final page that will be needed for this particular chapter of his life's work. The oil lamp burns with its usual steady flame, but somehow the light seems different now, softer and warmer, as if it too understands that this night marks not an ending, but a gentle transition from one season of service to another. Outside the windows, dawn approaches with the confident glow of a sun that knows it will be welcomed. The November air carries the crisp promise of winter, but also the subtle assurance that spring will follow in its time, that the world's great wheel continues its patient turning, bringing with it cycles of rest and renewal that have comforted human hearts since the beginning of time. His hand, now steady, despite the weeks of exhaustion, takes up the familiar quill one final time. The ink wells up dark and true as he dips the tip, and when he touches it to the paper, the words that flow seem to write themselves, carrying with them all the accumulated wisdom of the nights he has witnessed. November 15th, he writes, and even the date seems significant, not an ending but a new beginning, a marker of survival and hope. The ward is quiet now. filled with the gentle breathing of those who have found their way back to health, and the peaceful silence of beds that stand ready for whatever tomorrow may bring, but no longer echo with the urgency of crisis. He pauses, listening to the sounds around him, the soft murmur of early morning conversation as the day shift arrives, the distant clatter of breakfast preparations, the cheerful call of birds greeting the dawn from their perches in the trees outside. These are the sounds of a world returning to its natural rhythms, and they fill his heart with a gratitude so profound it seems to expand beyond the boundaries of his own body. I write these final words, he continues, not as an ending but as a beginning, the first words of whatever story comes next in this ongoing narrative of human resilience and love. We have passed through the darkness together, each of us changed by what we have witnessed and experienced, but not defeated. We emerge into the light, carrying with us the knowledge of how much we are capable of enduring, and more importantly, how much we are capable of caring for one another when caring is what matters most. The quill moves across the page with deliberate slowness now, as if reluctant to reach the final punctuation mark. Each letter is formed with extra care, each word chosen for its ability to carry not just meaning, but the full weight of lived experience transformed into understanding. To those who recovered under my care, I offer my deepest gratitude, not for surviving, which was their own brave work, but for teaching me daily lessons about courage and hope that no medical textbook could ever contain. To those who did not survive, I offer my promise that their stories will be remembered, their love will be honored, and the tenderness they showed to others, even in their suffering, will continue to inspire acts of compassion long after these pages have yellowed with age. Outside, the first rays of true sunlight begin to slant through the windows, painting the ward in shades of rose and gold that transform the simple space into something approaching a cathedral. The light touches the empty beds with gentle fingers, blessing the places where healing has taken place. It illuminates the nurse's station where so many acts of quiet heroism have been performed without fanfare or recognition. It falls across the floor where countless footsteps have traced the pathways of care and compassion. The doctor lifts his pen from the page and reads what he has written, his lips moving silently as his eyes trace the familiar words. A small smile crosses his tired features, not the forced cheer of someone trying to convince himself that all is well, but the genuine satisfaction of someone who has completed work that truly mattered. All is quiet now, he writes in conclusion, the words flowing onto the paper like a benediction. The long night has ended, and the gentle morning has arrived at last. The patients rest in peace, some in the healing sleep of recovery, others in the eternal rest that comes at the end of all earthly struggles. The ward stands ready for whatever service may be asked of it next, and I am grateful beyond words to have been privileged to witness so much beauty in the midst of so much difficulty. Rest now. Rest, and dream of tomorrow. He sets down the quill for the final time, the simple gesture carrying with it the weight of completion. The diary closes with a soft whisper of pages settling against one another, its leather binding warm to the touch from all the nights it has rested under the glow of lamplight, absorbing the warmth of human attention and care. The lamp waits patiently as he tidies his small desk, arranging his medical instruments with the same careful precision he has maintained throughout these long weeks. Each tool finds its proper place in his bag, stethoscope coiled neatly, thermometer nestled in its protective case, bottles of medicine secured against accidental breakage. The routine is comforting in its familiarity, a final ritual that marks the transition from work to rest. When everything is in its proper place, he reaches for the lamp's brass base and gently turns the small wheel that controls the flow of oil to the flame. The light wavers for a moment, dancing like a living thing reluctant to leave this faithful companion who has shared so many nights of witness and writing. Then, with a soft sigh barely audible in the quiet room, the flame gutters and goes out, leaving behind only the faint scent of extinguished wick and the warm glow of morning light flooding through the windows. The doctor rises from his chair slowly, his body protesting the long hours, but his spirit feeling lighter than it has in weeks. He walks through the ward one final time, not as a physician making rounds, but as a guardian taking leave of his watch. At each bed, he pauses briefly, not to check medical charts or adjust pillows, but simply to acknowledge the miracle of breath continuing, of hearts beating steadily, of life persisting with quiet determination. The morning light grows stronger as he completes this final circuit, painting everything it touches in shades of hope and renewal. Dust motes dance in the golden beams like tiny spirits celebrating the arrival of day. The windows frame views of a world awakening to possibilities that seemed impossible just weeks ago. Children playing in distant yards, smoke rising from chimneys in homes where families gather around breakfast tables, church bells beginning their call to worship in voices that speak of gratitude rather than supplication. Finally, the doctor makes his way to the small cot that has been prepared for him in the room adjacent to the ward, a simple bed with clean white sheets and a pillow that promises the deep, restorative sleep of someone whose work is, for now, complete. As he lies down, still fully clothed and ready to respond if needed, his last conscious thought is of gratitude. Gratitude for the privilege of service, for the lessons learned in the darkest hours, for the reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, human beings are capable of extraordinary tenderness toward one another. The morning continues its gentle advance across the world, bringing with it the promise of healing continued, of stories yet to be written, of hope renewed with each passing day. The doctor's breathing deepens and slows, joining the quiet symphony of rest that fills the peaceful ward. His burdens, carried faithfully through the long night, settle gently onto the shoulders of the new day, to be picked up again only when and if they are needed. And so, dear dreamer, we reach the end of our quiet journey through the pages of history, through the gentle courage of one physician's dedication to healing, through the profound reminder that even our darkest chapters can be illuminated by the light of human compassion. The doctor sleeps now, his diary closed, his lamp extinguished, his work transformed from the urgency of crisis into the peaceful satisfaction of duty fulfilled. The story ends not with grand pronouncements or dramatic flourishes, but with the simple, revolutionary act of rest, the acknowledgement that sometimes the most heroic thing we can do is to lay down our burdens and trust that the world will continue its patient turning, bringing with it new dawns and fresh possibilities for love to manifest in countless quiet ways. The ward is bathed now in the full light of morning, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sings its liquid song to the awakening world. The doctor's care and compassion, recorded faithfully in his leather-bound diary, deserve to be remembered, not as monuments to suffering overcome, but as testimony to the extraordinary beauty of ordinary people choosing, again and again, to meet darkness with light, fear with love, despair with the simple but radical act of continuing to care. And so, dear dreamer, as the echoes of history fade and the quiet of the night settles in, may your mind find peace and your dreams take you to places even time cannot touch. Until next time, sleep well and dream deeply.